All right, so you wanted this deep dive on Steven Seagal, and I'll be honest, when you sent it in, I was picturing, those epic fight scenes, the ponytail flying everywhere. But turns out his real story is a lot more complicated than any action movie.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Seagal represents a very specific time in action movies, right? You had those huge, like larger-than-life guys like your Stallones, your Schwarzeneggers, all about that over-the-top 80s energy. But Seagal, he was different. He had this like air of mystery about him, this
Yeah.
quiet intensity, and he claimed that all came from like real-life experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He wasn't just some muscle-bound hero. He was supposedly like a real martial artist, an ex-cop, even like whispers of CIA connections. I mean, above the law, under siege, his whole career was built on being like the ultimate badass. But our source, this YouTube video essay, it really digs into whether any of that was actually true.
And what's really interesting is how the essay kind of connects his public image with how he allegedly treated women, and that becomes a recurring theme.
Yeah, and right away the video digs into Seagal's martial arts background and gets interesting pretty quick. It claims that his ex-wife alleged that he only got his black belt because the judge fell asleep during his examination.
Whether or not that's true, it kind of shows a pattern that keeps coming up, right? Seagal has all these stories about like fighting Yakuza gangsters and tossing people through the walls of dojos. But his ex-wife claims the only time he ever actually kicked anyone out of his school was when he tossed out like a couple drunk guys. So you start to see this like contrast between his image and what might really have happened.
Yeah, like his entire persona is built on, something shaky, and it makes you question everything else, right? So what about those claims of CIA and law enforcement ties? Were those legit?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The video essay, it kind of implies that Seagal may have, let's say, embellished his experiences a little. He supposedly spent some time with real agents, FBI, CIA, listened to their stories, and then later on he kind of presented them as his own.
Wow. Talk about appropriating someone's life story. But didn't he have that reality show, Steven Seagal, Lawman? Didn't that kind of give him some credibility when it came to his, like, law enforcement background?
Well, not really. He did do some ride-alongs, and he was, for a bit, a reserve deputy sheriff.
Hmm.
But that's not really the same as being, a full-on law enforcement officer. I mean, a reserve deputy usually has very limited power, and their training it's way less intense.
So it's more about how it looks than actual, qualifications.
Exactly. And the video source, it actually points out that while they were filming Lawman, a bunch of women, they came forward with harassment allegations against Seagal. And eventually he actually had to resign as a reserve deputy because of it.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal. It sounds like these allegations of misconduct with women were starting to have a real impact on his career.
Yeah, definitely. And that leads us to, like, another layer of this whole thing. Seagal's alleged ties to organized crime. So the essay, it goes into how Seagal got funding for his production company, and apparently it involves some pretty shady characters with ties to, organized crime.
Whoa, hold on. So we're talking like mob money bankrolling his Hollywood dreams. That's a whole other level.
Right. And the way the video tells it, these alleged mobsters, they wanted their cut. It kind of paints Seagal as this guy who got in over his head. It sounds like there were some pretty serious consequences. Around that time, his career took a nosedive.
Because this is when he goes from like big budget action star to, well, straight to video, right?
Exactly. And for an actor, that's a big deal. It usually means your star power is fading. Hollywood's way of saying you're not A-list anymore. But what's interesting is the video claims it wasn't just like outside forces that caused this. Seagal's behavior on set, that played a part too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've heard stories about that, like his work ethic or lack thereof during those years.
Oh yeah, a video essay, it's got tons of those. Apparently, Seagal was notorious for showing up late, not listening to the director, even using body doubles for scenes that should have been pretty easy for him.
Wait, body doubles. For the guy who built his whole image on being a martial arts master, you got to admire the, I don't know, the confidence.
Right. And the video actually shows clips from his later movies. It's kind of hilarious how obvious it is that it's not even him fighting. You see these quick cuts, these weird camera angles, these fights that look more like, I don't know, interpretive dance than anything dangerous.
That's such a far cry from his early stuff. Remember those crazy bone-crunching fights in Above the Law, Under Siege? I mean, those were intense.
Exactly. And the video claims that this big change in fighting style, it wasn't some artistic choice. It was often because Seagal was, well, let's just say he wasn't in the best shape. Plus, he apparently just didn't want to put in the work for those big fight scenes. There are even stories about him only being on set for like a couple of hours each day, which meant they had to use stand-ins and body doubles for most of his scenes.
No way. So you've got all this stuff happening at once, right? Allegations against him, legal troubles in his personal life, and his on-set behavior becoming legendary for all the wrong reasons. No wonder his career went downhill.
Right, but it's important to remember that this is just one side of the story. The video makes a pretty good case, but Seagal, he's denied a lot of these allegations.
Good point. It's like a bunch of he said, she said stuff. Right. And it's up to us to figure out what we believe. But no matter what you think, there's no denying that Seagal's career is a trip. It really makes you think about fame, accountability, and how much of ourselves we show the world. It really makes you think. How much of what we see from celebrities is like real and how much is all just for show.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's not just Hollywood, right? Think about politicians, business people, even those big Instagram influencers. We're always seeing these like perfect versions of them.
And it feels like it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real and what's fake.
That's exactly why these deep dives are so important. It's about taking a closer look, not just believing everything we see and hear, and actually thinking for ourselves.
And with Siegel, I mean, there are some serious accusations against him. We're not just talking about maybe exaggerating his past, but like actual allegations of abuse and harassment. The video essay really dives into that, and I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. We can't just ignore those allegations. They paint a pretty disturbing picture of his behavior. And it makes you think, right, like, how do we deal with an artist's work when we know about the bad things they might have done?
It's that whole debate, can you separate the art from the artist? And if so, like, where do you draw the line? There are no easy answers.
Not at all. It's different for every situation, and there's a lot of gray area,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm.
But we have to be willing to talk about it, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. So we've gone pretty deep into the whole Steven Seagal thing, and I'm still left wondering, was he an action hero or was it all a big Hollywood act?
Based on what we saw in the video, it seems like maybe a little bit of both. I mean, he definitely had that star power. In those early movies, they were great.
Mm.
But when you dig a little deeper, you see that not everything was as it seemed. And some of what we find, it's not pretty.
Right. It reminds us that nothing is ever simple, especially when it comes to famous people and the stories they tell about themselves. There's always more to it than meets the eye, and sometimes the truth is way crazier and a lot messier than anything you could make up.
Totally. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this whole thing. Stay curious. Don't believe everything you hear. And don't be afraid to, like, look a little closer at things.
Well said. This was awesome. Thanks for suggesting this deep dive. It was fascinating, even if it got a little dark at times. It just goes to show some of the most interesting stories are hidden right there in plain sight. We just got to be willing to uncover them.